different every time. And it is here, of course, to welcome our amazing guest of today, the Chief Innovation Officer at Mozilla, Katharina Borchert. Katharina, a pleasure to host you. Welcome to Remote Daily.
Thank you so much for having me. I really seriously wish I had discovered your format earlier and had not always been so busy. I am so impressed with what you have pulled together here, the community you have built in this amazing, heartwarming format with land acknowledgements and live music. I cannot wait for the next season. No pressure.
Very kind of you to say, and thank you for discovering it today. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy. And before we learn a little bit more about what you do, I would love to know how you do. How do you feel on the inside? How's your inner Katharina today?
It's good that you said today because I feel like the last, I don't even know how many months I've been locked up at home now has been a roller coaster, like it has been for most of us. But I was really excited about talking to you about a topic today uh, that I'm sorry, I got distracted by a chat. A colleague of mine joined that was addressed in the chat. A colleague of mine joined, Justin, who's one of my favorite colleagues. He's wonderful. And apparently some Zoom mistake
You
gave him.
stole your name.
I am the
Happens.
original one. I please stand up. Justin is Justin. He just, sorry,
Disguises.
you got to run around with my German name today.
Got
And
it.
so I'm excited to be here today. I've already taken a long walk with the dog, and I'm grateful for everyone who's here. So I'm doing fine and looking forward to the conversation. This is probably like one of my, or if not the favorite Zoom call of the week.
Oh, that is very kind, especially because it comes from you. You have been on hundreds or maybe even thousands of Zoom calls long before this pandemic. You are a journalist at heart. You held leadership positions at media companies in Europe, namely Der Spiegel and others, usually always being the first female leader in these roles. And then you came to the Silicon Valley, now being the Chief Innovation Officer at Mozilla, a foundation that is behind the Firefox browser, of course, and many other amazing digital products. Your team is globally distributed. You've worked remotely for a long time. So I'm very, very flattered by this compliment. But I also have to ask you, being through thousands and thousands more Zoom calls than all of us here combined, what is your advice against Zoom fatigue?
So I have to say it was, I didn't experience Zoom fatigue as much before. Now it is real. It's a thing. If you're feeling it, it is real. I've been with Mozilla a little over 4.5 years now. As you said, my team's super remote. Mozilla in general is a very remote friendly organization. About 50% of our workforce has traditionally worked remote. And so Zoom has always been a key part of my life, but I had more of like a mixed work life. I would start with the very early calls with the Europeans in the morning, all
Mm.
remote from home. Then I would go into the office. I'd be in a meeting room where like 2 or 3 people were in person and the rest were in big screens. So it was more mixed. And I didn't feel the Zoom fatigue. I didn't have the issues of feeling so disconnected. Um, but I have to say it's real, and I think the biggest problem behind it is that it is harder for us. I think for every human to connect through a video screen. I think the technology is amazing. Like none of us could have done this 10 years ago. And so I am super grateful. This is a game changer. But personally, I experience that the the emotional lift and the emotional investment to really connect with people over Zoom is higher and heavier than when I meet people in person. That's just my personal
Interesting.
experience. And I feel like in order to have a really good build good rapport, to have a good Zoom meeting that is not just I mean, you're always trying to do more than just go through agenda items and say yes or no or approved or not approved. That's like how it works in TV shows, but not in reality. You want to connect with colleagues, and
Mm.
I feel like I also get more energy back from people when I see them in person.
Hmm.
And so even though I've spent the last 15 years stuck in meetings and with a tight schedule, but I could always draw like energy and enthusiasm from meeting people, like set aside the really bad meetings. But I like being in the workplace. I like seeing people in the office. I like the serendipity that happens when you run into somebody in the office
Hmm.
kit. So, and all of this is gone now, and everything is suddenly scheduled. And I'm just like, I am emotionally exhausted at the end of the day, and I've gotten very little, or there is a real risk of getting very little of this positive energy and this feeling of human connectedness through video that I would get otherwise, even in the work.
I see. So no real advice other than maybe taking long walks and maybe structuring your day a little bit differently so there's not too many calls in a row. Um, I'm asking, of course, because um, I I only recently learned this from you that you started opening up about your own issues with mental health and well-being, especially at work. You started at the end of last year talking openly about suffering from depression in your 20s. And I feel very honored that you agreed to come on Remote Daily to share the space here with us and share your experience and what you take from it as a leader. So, first of all, I would ask you to please take us with you on your journey. What triggered your that, and how did you actually get through it?
So I think for many, so I just for context, I really I suffered from very severe, very debilitating depression throughout, well, actually all of my 20s, realistically. And in parallel, the doctors have coined the nice term comorbidity. I was very comorbid, so to speak. I also had life-threatening anorexia, and I was really, really struggling. And I don't think I can pinpoint a single thing that caused this. There isn't a single traumatic event that I could
Hmm.
easily point to. And I always found that really difficult because I felt that since, I had a happy childhood, I have a wonderful family who supported me. I always felt like that, well, it must be my fault because I should be grateful, I should be happy, I'm otherwise physically healthy and I'm talented and I have all this opportunity and blah blah blah, all the things you tell yourself. So it was to this day, I know the factors. I know that, like, a lot of research points to genetic factors that play a role, but I can't point to, like, this was it, I wish I hadn't
Hmm.
had this experience or so. And I didn't talk about it for a really long time because it is still heavily stigmatized in society, as you know, in Germany much more than in the US. And when I was struggling with it, I'm that old, it's like the 90s. You couldn't even get a lot of, like, material and information in Germany about it. Like, I swear there was exactly one generally available book on anorexia. I didn't even have the language to talk about it.
Hmm.
I have wonderful parents, but I grew up on a farm, and traditionally farmers don't have the language to talk about mental health. That is, like, not a thing. I had nowhere to go. And when I went into business, and I was like, it was like the triple threat in all media companies. I was by far the youngest. I was the first woman ever in a leadership position, and I was the only kind of like digital native. And so it was so hard to even get a foot in the door and build this career and be accepted and respected and make my way. There was no way I felt safe and comfortable talking about my depression because
Hmm.
you don't want to be the depressed media chick.
Right.
And so I just, even after I was feeling better about it, I was always I always felt upset that there were no role models who talked about this, but hey, I was not going to be the one who started this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot has changed in society, and I feel better about where I am in life and in my career. And so I have decided to talk about it because I'm not going to sit around and hope that more people do it. So I got to do it. And what really helped me, I think, honestly, was therapy for many years. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I just recently, for an interview, looked up the numbers, and I looked up the numbers specifically for Germany, and the prevalence of depression is rising everywhere. And even that's what I tell when I talk to CEOs of big companies who always feel like, well, mental health, let HR deal with it, or
Right.
why do you need to talk about personal things? Like, even if you do not care about, which, like, is terrible obviously, but even if you do not care about the people who work for you, it has massive business implications as well. And sorry, now I derailed my own thinking. And so, the numbers I looked up is that in Germany today, it is still only 1 out of 4 people diagnosed with depression that receives adequate treatment, and
Wow.
40% do not receive treatment at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is dramatic. That is truly awful. I don't know what the numbers look like for the US, but I know that along here, along with the general mental health systemic with along the health system crisis that we have, the lack of availability of free and universal health care, we definitely also have
Right.
a crisis of, like, a lack of availability of mental health
Mm-hmm.
resources, and the numbers can't be good here either. And so it took me a really long time to get help, and there were many false starts. And I will just tell you one story. I was at university at that point, and I finally, like, figured out that I am so miserable. This cannot possibly be normal. And wanting, like, spending hours writing in your diary how you wish you were dead probably wasn't normal. And so I finally figured out that the university had a resource and a psychologist you could talk to. So I finally, like, gather all my courage and have like 3 or 4 sessions with this guy. And at the 5th session, he comes back and says, well, you're a really terribly tragic case. And honestly, I can help you get a little bit better and manage your life a little bit better, but you will never be really healthy. And so I have prepared something in Germany has a system where you, like, if you're formally diagnosed and declared as disabled, you get better
Of
government.
course.
And so he said,
Get like a
well,
pension. Yeah.
I can, yeah, exactly. And I can easily, or I can help you push through a 75% disability. And then you're
Oh,
taken care of and you don't have to
very
worry
helpful.
about it anymore. And I was crushed. I'm like,
Wow.
I wanted help. I didn't want to be 75% disabled and get a government pension, for crying out loud. So it took me a really long time and a lot of false starts to find the right help. And even once you have it, it's a really long journey to learn better coping mechanisms, understand what's going on with you, involve your family and friends in that. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to change a lot about how you live, and you have to learn a lot about yourself.
And you have now translated some of these mechanisms and strategies to help yourself, and of course, the bad experiences that you had into the workplace as a leader at Mozilla. So I wonder if you could boil it down, like how your experience with depression influenced the way you lead today, and if you maybe can share an example for how you do it.
I think it was a gradual process over time, and I hope that when we, like, talk again on remote daily in 10 years, that I will have learned even more and gotten better at what I do. But I think we've all been at many points in our lives where we realize that there are a lot of deeply unhappy people in the workplace. And and a lot of workplaces are toxic and really shitty. And um, there is no golden rule that says you must have a shitty workplace. it's quite the opposite. We know from research that Google has done that, for example, they did this great research about 5 years ago or so into what makes a team really high performing. And they thought a lot about, it's like the different skill sets on the team. And I can share the study and all they've published all the resources around it. And they realized that psychological safety in the workplace is the most critical thing for teams to come together, to be creative, to be innovative, but also to be high performing. Like teams where people feel psychologically safe in this Google study within Google performed 17% better than other teams where this factor was missing. And I had kind of instinctively felt that. I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the research, but I felt like my depression has influenced me so much and has shaped me so much, and has, I think, the most important piece that it gave me is a high degree of self-awareness. And I think high degree of self-awareness is super helpful for everyone, but it should be an absolutely critical leadership skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that helped me to think about what would a workplace look like that I would like to work in? How would I like to be managed? How would I like to have meetings? And, I was in a leadership position. I could implement a different culture and I could start shaping a different culture. And again, I had many false starts. Occasionally, I'm still mortified about the mistakes I made. And I want to call former colleagues that I didn't treat right and so forth. But as a leader, I am the one who sets the tone and who shapes the culture. And so I just started thinking about like what would help me, what would make me feel better, and started experimenting from
Mm-hmm.
that. For me, one of the most critical pieces is you set the tone as the leader. And if you want people to open up, if you want people to feel safe, and if you want people to share things, you have to set the example. Nobody's going to do that if you don't do that yourself. So I always try to lead with a lot of vulnerability. I probably share more personal stories than other leaders do.
Mm-hmm.
At least at a team level, I started talking more about challenges. I have learned and I think become rather good at admitting my own mistakes and apologizing for that. The hardest thing for me to learn that I am still grappling with is reaching out when I need help,
Mm-hmm.
when I really like can't solve something on my own, or I need more support. And but I think that is critical. So I'm working on myself. I'm trying to model that and get better at that, because that is the only way how to how to shape this culture and how to allow other people to follow your example and do that. And it requires a lot of, as I said, it requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires a lot of willingness to be vulnerable, to be candid, and it's often uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. And for recognizing mental health issues in others, especially in a distributed time where we are not in the same room together, what do you recommend? Like, what do you recommend to maybe sharpen your own antennas as a leader? And maybe there's all tools and strategies just to recognize these issues in others in order to start helping.
I think one thing is important. We're still bosses and managers and coworkers. We're not therapists. So I would never presume to be able to diagnose anyone and say, "Hey, I think you." I don't know if you remember Kanye West and his recent episodes on Twitter, and suddenly like everyone was an armchair psychologist, and
Right.
so I would never presume to do that. And I think it's important that to keep the functions very different. But the other thing that my depression gave me is like a really deeply developed um, ability to have empathy and compassion. And so I think I notice more subtle signals because, you know, I know what these signals look like in myself. I've seen it in others. I feel like once you start recognizing, or once you start working around and thinking around the issue of mental health, you start recognizing
Hmm.
subtle signs in others that you would not have picked up before. Um, and so I think I have good antenna for that. And again, I don't want to make people uncomfortable by reaching out and saying, hey, I think you're in the middle of a depressive episode. So there are a number of things I do. And one is I'm incredibly repetitive with this, but I tell people constantly, especially in the current crisis, we're all overwhelmed. And I think the current crisis, and that's the upside, offers an opportunity to talk about this more openly, because suddenly it's like not weird people suffering from
Hmm.
depression and not having their stuff together. On some level, we're all experiencing symptoms of potential burnout. It's like we have this collective burnout almost, especially here in the US, with like layers and layers of crisis. And so I often repeat myself and say, hey, it is totally okay to feel bad. It is totally okay to not have 120% performance. But please reach out. Don't drop a whole bunch of work because you're feeling bad and make us do the cleanup. Like reach out. We're all here to help each and every one of you. Try to be open and like raise your hand and signal, I am struggling. It doesn't matter whether like your kids go crazy or it's your personal struggle. It is
Hmm.
totally okay. We can, and then I sit down with colleagues and I say, okay, you have like, these are the 3 projects you have on your desk. Like, let's determine what is the priority. And that's all you focus on. And then we move, like we've dropped stuff. We've moved stuff to next year. It's like check in with a coworker, ask them for help, reach out, talk to me, talk to your manager, whoever it is. Where this is where like a team really comes together. And so I'm very repetitive about that. And I think the other important thing is that also helps at least me with Zoom fatigue. You know, Germans are feared for their strict meetings and keeping agendas and everything. And so
Never heard of that.
I always I always make extra time in the beginning to
Hmm.
check in, to like ask people how they're doing, to talk about how I am doing, see if anybody wants to share anything. So I think we all need to make more room to connect on a
Hmm.
personal level and see the human behind the agenda item and the work
Hmm.
item, and always have the human first and center. And then everything follows from that.
But now you are an extremely empathetic leader, and I love just listening to you because I always when I listen to you, I feel like yeah, I want to work with you. Like you're there, this person that understands. But there's so many others who don't, who have not had your experience, who do not have your empathy. So what do you request from organizations to have in place, especially now that we are mostly still in emergency mode, but we're transitioning to an era to work from anywhere. So this problem will persist that we can't tell from somebody being in the same room with us how they feel. What do you request from organizations that they should have or put in place now to be more aware of mental health?
I think let me answer that on 2 different levels. I think generally beyond the pandemic, we need a dramatic overhaul of our workplaces and of our understanding of what good leadership looks like. Too many companies, and you see that in Silicon Valley everywhere, still believe that the epitome of leadership is like the super aggressive winner take all, push through everything, sleep in the factory, push your people to 150% performance at all cost. And as long
AKA Elon Musk.
I
Yes.
didn't even want to point out Elon. There are many, like there are books and books about people, and you know there's always. I'm not advocating for lowering standards. I'm not advocating for lowering performance goals. That's not it. But I'm talking about how do we achieve the goals? How do we achieve performance? And this guy with the whip that whips everyone into shape is a totally, and that is aggressive and crude at all times. it sounds like a cartoonish version and I'm over dramatizing, but we need to get away of understanding this as the epitome of leadership. We need to
Mm.
uh, uh, we need to put humans first, understand that, especially in the knowledge economy that we're working in, none of us are robots. And as long as we're not replaced by robots, we need to create workplaces that actually allow people to be creative and innovative and
Mhm.
do their best in an environment. And so it's more and more since I started talking about it, and based on the experiences of the last year, this is like more and more becoming my mission to drive this
Mhm.
overall long-term change, like on a very practical level. I think, and I see a lot of progress there. Companies need to put in place good resources for their employees. Here in the US, that means like good healthcare plans. It means having uh,
Mm.
talk therapy hotlines, availability of these things. There are a lot of great tools. I recently,
Mm.
um, my team experimented with like, you know, there are many apps that try to teach you better self-awareness and meditation and better coping
Right.
strategies. Because I ran into someone who works at Happify, which is not quite as well
Mhm.
known, but they provide these apps and services for companies. My team got to test that over the last couple months. And I think there are many small things. You don't need to hire an army of therapists, but you need to put more resources into the workplace and offer more resources that people can tap into anonymously without having to talk to anyone. I think that's like the critical baseline that we should be
Mhm.
doing more of. But I also think
S-
we need to develop a better training for managers. You might not be born an empath, and nobody's born a great manager or a great leader. These are things you can learn. And we constantly have these workshops about like, how do you set OKRs? That's great. You like, if that's your system for evaluating performance, by all means, learn how to set better OKRs. But why not also develop more curricula on like how to connect, how to build strong teams, how to
Mhm.
give better feedback, how to build personal rapport. It's
Mhm.
I think we can teach these things to a certain degree, but we need to get started on that.
Thank you so much, Katharina. Sarah just put it in the chat. You're clearly not advocating for lowering standards, you're raising them. And that's,
Thank
I think, a great summary of what you just did. Last bold prediction, a quick one and an impossible one, what I'm going to ask you anyway. What mental state will we be in 2021?
As somebody who currently lives in the US, that depends very much on the election outcome. But I think generally, I mean, obviously, the virus isn't going to go away as soon as we had hoped. Even when a vaccine is there, it'll take time to produce enough of it to have everyone vaccinated. I think for quite a while, we will be in a state of mental exhaustion and collective social burnout. And we need to figure out how to deal with that and how to address that in families, in workplaces, in
Mhm.
government, so that we can then switch to kind of like the reawakening and the new hope, hopefully in the middle of the year. And ideally, I don't remember who it was that said that you should never waste a perfectly good crisis. And ideally, this does not leave us unchanged. And we take a lot from it and we learn how to talk about mental health better. We learn how to change our workplaces. We
Right.
learn what better leadership looks like. And then, honestly, in my opinion, all the pain will have been worth it.